Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily Coast to Brief. Boy, I'm out of practice because we had the holiday. Welcome to the first show of the 2024 election cycle year. Holy crap, it's happening, Carrie. It's happening. And we are going to be tracking the ins and outs of the 2024 presidential cycle on this podcast. It's going to be a little terrifying, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, I think we have a real good chance here. If we all do what we need to do, we have a good chance to drive a stake in the heart of MAGA. And we have to do it. I think our country has to eliminate this existential threat to our democracy. So glad you are joining us. Glad you're here. We are glad to be here. Carrie, I love your Maryland hat.
Maryland, Michigan.
Wait, Minnesota? Minnesota?
Go blue, baby. Go
Massachusetts.
Blue.
Massachusetts.
We just won. I know one of those M states, right? My wife, who's actually from Boston, is sometimes like, you come from one of those flyover M states. I'm like, yeah, there's quite a difference between Minnesota, Michigan, and Montana. There's some differences there. There's some differences. So, and I'm sure everyone from those states would be happy to tell you what they are. But anyway, listen. Good start to the year for me. I mean, I got to go to the Rose Bowl.
Michigan you were there.
I was at the Rose Bowl, and then Michigan won the national championship. So the Rose Bowl was the semifinal. Anyway, I will say this because there is a tie-in. There is a political tie-in. I wrote a piece for the site saying what I learned about 2024 presidential politics from the from the Rose Bowl. And which I think is a decent read, unless you just hate Michigan, then don't read it because it'll just tick you off. But I think but one thing I will say, Michigan, when I grew up, Michigan was a really good team every year. We had a good chance of going to the Rose Bowl and winning, et cetera. Then we went through a really bad, decade and a half down period where our team just got gutted and we kept trying to rebuild it and it was a rough go. And and then in the last 3 years, we've really turned around and there's nothing you appreciate what you win or what you get way more when you've lost it. And I think that holds for democracy. When, democracy has been just considered for most of my lifetime to be in the ether of the United States. It's just there. It's just in the air you breathe and it's not going anywhere. Wait, I think you're muted.
I was going to say, it's baked into our national founding document, right? Why would you even question?
Right. You would never question it, right? You would never question. And we've had to question it over the past, basically in the Trump era. Trump and his MAGA cultists have made us question it. And so, now here we are and we have to fight for it. And, democracy is going to be a lot sweeter and we're going to be a lot more appreciative of it. Assuming that we are able to prevail here, hopefully in short order and not in the long term. I mean, hopefully we can prevail in the next decade and not have to have a longer march back than that. Yeah. So anyway.
That analogy actually also holds true for abortion rights. Same thing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And which is in abortion rights, that's all about freedom, right? We're talking about having freedom here versus not, right? That's the difference in saving our democracy. We get freedom or we get, no abortion rights. We get, people are stripped of their healthcare decisions. We get book bans. Yeah. We get, all contraception, all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff baked into that. So anyway.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's a theme that we've actually hit upon significantly last year, and it's going to be a theme that it's definitely going to loom large in this coming presidential election, is how Republicans used to identify with the whole idea of freedom and how they utterly surrendered that Democrats didn't even have to fight for it. Republicans just sort of kind of handed it to them on a platter and said, here, you're now the party of freedom because we're the party of going after corporations like Disney and Miller Lite. We're the party that's going after people's abortion rights and their contraception rights. We're the party that's going to stick government into everybody's business and forget that freedom stuff. We talked about that. The only time we talk about freedom anymore is the Second Amendment, it's gun rights. It really is like I just understand because everybody loves freedom. It was a great concept, and if you're so strongly branded with that word, and to just give it up like nothing, and Donald Trump was a big part of that. Ron DeSantis has been huge in leading the charge, and as much as conservatives have cried about being canceled, like they've become like the kings, the masters to try to cancel people, like Harvard's president, over things that they don't like, and so they have become what they used to claim to hate the most. They used to claim that that Democrats were taking away people's freedoms, and quite frankly, I'm kind of glad that this is something that has sort of flipped. It makes our lives a lot easier in selling the Democratic Party, not just to our own faithful, but also extending it to the swing constituencies in the suburbs. I think it's no surprise that suburban white college-educated women have been swinging in our direction. The more that Republicans attack the idea of freedom, the more that it solidifies that constituency. And I I don't know if I have a lot of data yet to prove it, but I get the sense there's like ruminations and emanations that college-educated suburban white men are also sort of getting a little queasy at the way that the Republican Party has lost all semblance of the notions of freedom and whatnot. So I'm excited about where we're going. I think it puts us in a good, solid footing. It's no surprise that the first word in Joe Biden's announcement speech back last year was freedom, and it's something that Democrats are going to ride very effectively, I think, into these elections.
Sorry, I've got a leaf blower here, so I was just gonna say, you know what, Marcos, you are so right, and then I'm gonna mute myself again.
So the main topic of today's show actually is not going to be about the general election. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about that, but we're going to be talking about the Republican primary. And the next time we talk on this show will be the day after the Iowa caucuses. So we're going to have a lot better sense if there's going to be much of a Republican race in 2024. Right now, obviously, Donald Trump looms large. He's got the big polling leads. There's hints that maybe South Carolina former Governor Nikki Haley is getting a little bit of traction. Ron DeSantis has polls show he has support in the high single digits, low double, 12, 13%. Can he make a run of it? There's always this question, Karen, you know this very well, having tracked politics for a long time, elections, but there's always this question about how important a ground game is in Iowa. And there's a sort of pretense that, the ground game. And Ron DeSantis, he's got all the preachers. He's organized the preachers and evangelicals. And I'm not sure what Nikki Haley has organized. And I've actually seen a bunch of stories about Trump having zero ground game in Iowa. Like he's like so self-confident and so incompetent, he can't put together anything. Is the ground game going to be a thing, or is Donald Trump just going to ride his name recognition in the MAGA cult to an easy Iowa caucus victory?
I mean, my guess is yes, he will. His ground game, I think, at this point is the MAGA cult, and I think the difference here in this primary is that I don't think that we've had in Iowa that I can remember, like in my lifetime, is that Trump is virtually an incumbent, right? Usually when you have the Iowa caucuses, you have upstarts or, established politicians who obviously haven't held the presidency before. So like Obama, who was an upstart in 2008, and Hillary Clinton, who was an very established politician, national politician, but certainly hadn't won the presidency yet, other than having her husband had, and she had resided in the White House. But it's wildly different in that sense, because it's almost like Trump doesn't have to work to build Trump is just very different in this sense. So without having to have a real ground game the way most people do in an Iowa caucus. And really, unless you've covered an Iowa caucus or actually are an Iowan or in the past have participated in such a caucus or whatever, it's hard to kind of imagine like what it's like to go to these gymnasiums and have these people show up like in usually very, very cold, bitter weather to, to sort of caucus for their candidate and try to convince people if other candidates don't meet the threshold,
Hey,
why
Carrie.
they
Yeah, actually, this is a good chance to explain what the caucus is, because I bet you a lot of people still, and you were starting to get into it, but let's if you could step back and just start from the beginning. What is an Iowa caucus? Because it's not democracy.
No, it's not democracy, and it draws it draws sort of an insanely low proportion of voters to it, right? It's not something where you get to just go and cast your ballot and then walk out, right? Now, sometimes when people cast their ballots, they wait for hours in line, right? That does happen in big elections, but a caucus is really where a group of people, groups of people across the state descend on local places that are designated, usually like a school gymnasium, that type of thing. That's one of the most typical. And you go there and you get into, you divide up into your factions of the people that you are supporting, and then the account is taken. And I can't remember the actual threshold that you have to meet, but the candidates all have to meet a threshold of the percentage of people that are there in that particular gymnasium. So you literally count how many people are in that gym. Then you count how many people are, as they divide up, supporting, Trump or Haley or DeSantis, and then or Christie or Ramaswamy, etc. And then once you make that count, you could probably look this up while I'm doing it, just so we don't spread misinformation here, but I think it's like 15%. Like if you don't meet some sort of threshold of how many people are there, the percentage, then all of those people who are there supporting, for instance, Chris Christie, who will definitely not meet the threshold, they have to decide where to go. And at that point, you're having a conversation where the DeSantis folks and the Haley folks are trying to negotiate.
Like, come here, come over.
Yeah, come over. The water's warm, and let me tell you why our candidate's the best. And if you come over to us, then we can, if you really want someone to beat Trump and MAGA, then don't go over to DeSantis because he's essentially Trump light. And this is the type of negotiation that's going on. And so it's a wild thing, and it takes several hours to play out. And it really shows you why you can't kind of, unless you're a practical incumbent, which is what Trump is, you can't kind of half-ass, excuse my French there, but you can't kind of half-ass call it in Iowa. Like, you have to convince people that they want to go out in the bitter cold and spend 3 hours, typically.
It's not a secret ballot. It's out in the open.
Yeah.
Turnout is about 2 to 3% traditionally of Iowa's electorate, which is one. I still don't understand how Iowa kept that number one spot as long as it did, and the Democrats finally killed it. They took away Iowa, New Hampshire's number one role because of the wildly undemocratic and the amount of power that they had in filtering out the actual presidential field was unwarranted for a tiny percentage of an unrepresentative white rural state. So good riddance on the Democratic side. Republicans, of course, they kept it for whatever reasons they decided to keep it.
I miss it. I'm gonna
no.
Having covered it, I actually miss it. You know what? Let me give you the counter. Let me just give you the counter. Is that someone like Barack Obama can go there and spend time there, and but by virtue of the fact that you're focusing on such a small portion of people in a small state, you can actually make a name for yourself. Barack Obama probably wouldn't have ended up president if Iowa hadn't gone first, and I'm not kidding. So, you, because of that, you can go into gymnasiums, and as a person who's relatively unknown on the national stage, convince a bunch of people, make believers of them. And I'm not talking about the Republican, because the Republican is totally different. Their whole caucus is sort of overshadowed by evangelical voters and how much influence they have. But Barack Obama, he got rocket fuel out of Iowa, and as we all know, then lost in New Hampshire. So
there's nothing right. And the counter argument. Whoa, Carrie, we're in a real debate here. The counter argument. is that this was more the case back in the old days when people had to sort of connect on an individual basis with voters because it was three television stations, maybe one or two big radio stations. Local media was a big deal, so you had to actually talk to people and make sure you were covered by local media. That really started changing in 2004, actually, with the rise of the internet and blogging. We were a big part of that. We had people like Howard Dean and Wesley Clark have boomlets, and they were tested in that national cauldron of presidential politics, and both of those guys failed, but they had their moments. And in the end, we got the establishment figure, right? We got John Kerry in 2004, but in 2008, Barack Obama was a big deal. Like, he was already had a heavy national following. He was already raising tens of millions of dollars. I don't see how different it would have been had that first primary been South Carolina. In fact, it may have been even more help because, South Carolina has a heavily Black Democratic electorate. So the current Democratic system has basically
except that he was down. He was down in South Carolina. The Black South Carolinians at the time were more supportive of Hillary Clinton simply because they really didn't believe that a bunch of white voters would support him.
Yeah,
and once he came out of Iowa and a bunch of white voters did support him, Black South Carolinians were like, whoa, hold on here. I think we got a candidate.
So, and we don't know, obviously it's a different environment because he would have done well enough to obviously go on to Nevada and to other states. So it wouldn't have killed him. In the end, I'm sure in the current calendar, things the outcome would have been those two candidates going out, the distance, like happened in real life, right? Like, they were the two strongest candidates by far.
Absolutely.
In that field, but
it would have been them.
But we have now a system that has a more representative set of states that represent the base of the Democratic Party, not rural white voters that can afford. And a lot of that in Iowa, it's not working class people that are actually showing up to the caucuses. They actually have to work, or they have kids. They can't get childcare. So you have a bunch of really old people. So you got it generationally, it's not even representative. You get some college students in some college precincts, but that's not a lot of that in Iowa. Iowa's a very old state already.
The gymnasium that I was at covering Obama was very young.
Yeah,
young, and
they must have been in one of the very few college area or Des Moines.
They were so jazzed about Obama, so jazzed. But anyway,
and it's not really. And you know what? Throw it in there. Have straw polls. Like, I'm all for that. But the idea that it was Iowa that was going to actually determine, not Iowa, 2% of Iowans that were going to determine who our finalists for the presidential field was grossly unfair. And in my ideal world, honestly, Carrie, it wouldn't even be South Carolina. It would be rotating cast. It would be regional. Like, this year, the Midwest starts, and South, West Coast, and East Coast, and then it would rotate every 4 years, or when there's a real presidential election. It gets a little complicated, obviously, because states have to agree individually when their primary is, and some of the challenges that the parties can't just dictate this. And so in my ideal world, you might even have a national primary where you have a series of votes and it's all on the internet, like it's all online or mail voting. So there's just ways to do it to make it more fair. Iowa, a one-off might have been fun, but the fact that they held that position for, 100 years, however long it was, primaries have been around since the 50s. So 50, 60 years, they kept that monopoly, was grossly unfair for the rest of the country. And frankly, I don't think it gave us the best candidates a lot of the time, because the kind of candidates that won were the kind of candidates that went in there and promised ethanol and things and it was parochial interest deciding who the rest of the country was going to have as presidential candidates. So I, for one, am glad. But all that said, what would it take to basically harm Donald Trump? Like, what kind of result would it take for people to go, wait a second, Donald Trump is vulnerable? And I think it is 55% and less. I think if we get to a point where Trump does not, I mean, he may get 55 and Nikki Haley gets 15 and DeSantis gets 10 and whatever, right? But if the not the anti-Trump, because it's not necessarily anti-Trump, if the not Trump vote is close to 50%,
That's right. That's right.
I think that sets a narrative that
That's right.
half the party, even though we're talking 2% of Iowans.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. That's right. I mean, everybody's first of all, right now Trump is a non-story in Iowa because all of the national reporters expect him to win, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, so they're just that assumption just makes him not interesting. I think what the question everybody has is who comes in second. But I tell you what is a Trump story, if he doesn't get above 50%, right? And even if he's in the 51, 52, starting to look a little, iffy because then he starts to look a little vulnerable, right? And I think that if he were to, I mean, really, if he were to come in even with like 49%, I think people would make a big deal out of that. Now, the polling suggests that isn't true. The polling suggests that he will do better than that. But, Iowa's notoriously difficult. The caucuses are pretty difficult
the polling is rough.
Yeah, is to they like the polling can get sometimes pretty close to who's going to win, but by how much is kind of a different story. So so I think it would be interesting, number one, if to your point, he hovered just above 50 or fell below 50, and then that would become a story. Whoa, is Trump vulnerable
Yeah, then
here?
you're starting to do simple math. Is if
Yep.
if the rest of the base, the rest of the field consolidates, what
Right.
does that look like? And there's a very big difference in this year compared to previous years, because in previous years, what you would have is you would have three Republican factions sort of dominate. You would have the evangelical candidate, like a Ted Cruz or a Rick Santorum. You would
Mhm.
have, yeah, you would have the establishment candidate, Jeb Bush, or Mitt Romney, and then you would have like the Tea Party candidate. And the Tea Party candidate was like the Sarah Palin, like the crazy wild, what has now become MAGA. And what Trump has really done is he's sort of swallowed all three in a way, right? So there's really no factions. And so in previous cycles, what you would have is like, for example, back in 2016, Trump was winning, but not by a lot. Like
Mhm.
he was winning 30%, 40% in a fractured field. And the difference, just so it's clear for people, is that in the in the Democratic primary process, delegates are apportioned proportionately. You have to meet a certain threshold per state, but if you generally win 60% of the vote, you get like 60% of the delegates, roughly. In the Republican system, it's winner take all. So Trump was winning delegates, entire delegate slates from states by winning with like 40% of the vote, not with a majority. So this is not the Donald Trump of now. This was the Donald Trump of then.
Even
And,
less than 40. He was winning with
yeah,
like 33 to
yeah.
35% of the vote, and then because the vote was so divided up. I mean,
Yeah.
that was so
And so what happened is towards the end, and Carrie, remind me, because I know Ted Cruz was one of the survivors, and there was somebody else that lingered to the very end as well. And they were, do you remember who it was?
it wasn't Jeb, was it? It was no, I don't think it depends on what you're calling the very end, because I don't think Rubio basically he had a ticket out of Iowa. He came in third. And we don't need to dwell on this for too long because what we should be talking about is what's going
Yeah.
to happen. But Rubio came in third out of Iowa. Then he got thumped by Christie on the debate stage and had a rough time in New Hampshire. Had a bad showing
Yeah.
in New
Yeah.
Hampshire,
But
and then he dropped off shortly thereafter.
yeah, but I don't remember till the very end. There was a three-person race, and and the same thing happened back when Mitt Romney got the nomination. Is that you had the three factions, and nobody wanted to give up their position because they were getting a solid 30%, 25, 30%, and there was no unified anti front runner candidate. I think this year, because there's no factions, they've been erased. Trump has sort of co-opted all three of them. There very well could be a situation where if Haley's at 18% and DeSantis is at 12 or roughly, that DeSantis is like, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm out of here. Like DeSantis doesn't have an ideological reason to stay in the race. It's been embarrassing. Like, he should be dropping out yesterday. It's so bad. So I could see a very real situation that, given the right circumstances, that Nikki Haley can actually, with a more unified field, can start getting up into the 40s, mid 40% against Trump. And even if Trump is winner take all, winner take all, winner take all, like she can linger because she's close enough to sort of start flipping. And all she has to do is start winning at some point. And
right. We
is it going to happen?
even
Probably not.
Probably not, but possible. And we have polling that suggests that that's completely plausible because first of all, if Haley takes second, that would be a decent surprise in Iowa. And I bet you, the DeSantis support and donor support would dry up overnight. They'd be like, "You're done."
It's what drives candidates out of the primary isn't their own will to keep fighting. It's money.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
They shut that stuff down immediately. If they see their guy's not winning, boom, money gone.
Right. And he's already been DeSantis has already been having trouble, a lot of internal trouble in his, campaign and whatever. And it's not to say Haley hasn't made some missteps, but she doesn't have like this internal fight going on within her own camp. And let's just look at for instance, let's just say she's neck and neck, with DeSantis for second. She has a real shot in New Hampshire, whereas DeSantis doesn't. He's like in most polling now down into the single digits. In the latest University of New Hampshire poll with CNN, it just came out, I think today, Trump's at 39%,
Ooh.
Haley's at 32%, and Christie's at 12%. Okay, so those are the top three. Now, just think about this. What if? And I don't pretend to know what the heck Chris Christie would do because he's got a big ego and he's got a reason to stay in, which is I'm the only one that will say no one should vote for Trump and blah blah blah. But if Trump's at 39 and Haley's at 32, if Christie were to drop out, she would get almost all of Christie's votes because Christie's voters, they're not DeSantis people. They're not interested in DeSantis. They are there because they're the anti-Trump folks. And they would essentially put push Haley if he were to drop out into the 40s. And, Trump would obviously get some fall off from other people too. But the other thing that you have happening in New Hampshire, which I haven't seen any really good reporting on, maybe there's been some, but I haven't run across it yet, which is there's a bunch of Democrats in New Hampshire who are going to be twiddling their thumbs on primary night because they don't really care about voting for Dean Phillips, and independents too, who might be Democratic leaning. And they can vote. They can re-register as Republicans and vote in the Republican. And look, Trump is dreadful enough that he's the type of person that inspires people to go out and change their registration so that they can vote against him in the primary. And that could very well happen. So even if that's just ends up being a few percentage points of the vote, that makes a big difference. Like Haley, there's a lot of reasons that Haley could have a surprise upset of Trump in New Hampshire.
All right. So I'm gonna sort of recapitulate a lot of what you said. So this is sort of like the fluke. We have a real Republican race scenario, right? So Trump 55%, but you have Nikki Haley come in pretty strong with a strong, dominant second place finish, which just sort of knocks out everybody else because it's such a weak field. There was just a quick aside, there was a story, I think it was the Washington Post, that interviewed some Trump supporters in Iowa, and they had no clue when the caucus was because there's no campaign telling them. So literally they were asking the reporter, when is it this Monday? And the reporter's like, no, it's next Monday.
That's great.
And where do we need to go? Like they have no clue, right? So there's that, little things like that. I mean, that could be worth 5-10 points for all we know. And so you have Nikki Haley, maybe she gets 20%, 18%, whatever, but everybody else is sort of lagging. So immediately you have the DeSantis drops out. Ramaswamy, he might not drop out, but people will be like, okay, he's done. And then you get into New Hampshire where you're right. You have somebody like Christie, and Christie's like, you know what? My job here is to kneecap Donald Trump. And what better way to do that than to come out and forcefully endorse Nikki Haley as the one person that can save the Republican Party from from this.
Stranger things have happened.
And she either she wins, which, whoa, I mean, then she's going into home territory. And then you might even get a situation like you talked about with Obama, where black voters in South Carolina weren't taking him seriously because why would white voters vote for a black man? Suddenly thinking like, oh, this is a real candidate. This is a serious candidate. And it changed sort of the dynamics of that vote. Very same thing may happen where a lot of people who voted for Nikki Haley in the past were like, well, it's going to be Donald Trump, obviously. Suddenly they see a wounded Donald Trump. And this is a Donald Trump that's also dealing with all these cases. The headlines are pretty brutal. You might even have, some decisions come down on whether he has presidential immunity and whatnot that sort of keep stepping on his message. And I get the sense that a lot of Republicans are getting tired of the circus. And there's polling that shows Nikki Haley doing really well against Joe Biden. I wouldn't give it much credence because it's in a vacuum. It's weird polling. But if I'm Nikki Haley, I'm pumping that stuff out as much as I can, right?
I don't know why she's not talking about that non-freaking stop.
I mean, that's her strongest case.
Yeah.
And and then once you get to South Carolina, maybe she's got two wins in a row, or even if she comes close in New Hampshire and she pulls off a win in South Carolina, I think at that point it's a new race. And all the anti-Trump money, and there's a lot of anti-Trump money in the Republican Party, is going to flood in. She's not going to have any money problems.
It will be like a fire hydrant. She'll be like whoosh.
And Donald Trump, he'll lose it. He's already accusing her of not being eligible to run for president because of some crackpot birther theory that her parents weren't born in the U.S., therefore she's not allowed to run for president. I mean, he's already trafficking in. So I think he's already starting to feel a little bit threatened by her.
Absolutely. Donald Trump, the minute Donald Trump sent out, I don't know, a couple months ago, that thing about Nikki Haley being a bird brain, you knew that she was getting underneath his skin. And now he's like, oh, I'm going full conspiracy theory on Nikki Haley not being eligible to run, which is a total conspiracy theory. It's not true. She's eligible. And that's been put to bed, but not in people's, people who are like living in the miasma of conspiracy theories, like they can't see the light for the life of them. But the fact that he's pumping that out is very telling.
So, Carrie, I think we're at the end of the show, but I think we're sort of agreed that I mean, the more likely outcome is that Trump wins handily and he coasts, and then there's not much of a race. But there is, go ahead.
Can I just make one more point?
Yeah, please.
Which is that even if Haley doesn't win, if she makes a race of it, and I've been saying this, but for people who are, haven't this their first time tuning into us or whatever, welcome, by the way, if it is. But I think it's actually helpful to have Nikki Haley making a case against Donald Trump, and if she really senses that she can win and she really puts it on the line, she's got the communication skills to make a good case against him. And that's helpful for the, squishy Republicans, the people who aren't so, and people who really don't like Trump, even if they really don't like Biden, they really don't like Trump. It's really important to have Nikki Haley out there. Like, I think it could be important to have her out there making a strong case against Trump for those people, even if she loses.
And if you're worried about those polls showing Nikki Haley handily beaten Joe Biden, just think, will Donald Trump go down quietly if he loses the primary? Or will he take his 30% of the Republican Party and further radicalize them against Nikki Haley? She will have stolen the election. She's part of it. So it would sunder the Republican Party in half. I don't see a scenario where she beats Donald Trump and he doesn't take his marbles and runs home.
Unless there's a backdoor promise for a pardon. I mean, that's the one thing he legitimately cares about. If he, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I think, you could hear her being like, well, listen, we all know that Trump has been targeted by the Biden administration and I would do right by him and blah, 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 blah. I mean, like, maybe in that situation, that's his best play. The only reason, I mean, he might run again anyways, but his biggest reason for running is so that he can beat the rap, right? He needs to win in order to not go to jail, because he's almost surely going to get snagged somewhere.
Yeah.
So, and that's Chris Christie himself was like, I know that's one of his biggest fears, because when I was a U.S. attorney, Trump said to me, this is long before Trump was a politician. Trump said to me, man, I don't know how you do it. Like, I just can't imagine ever going to jail. And, Chris Christie's talked about that and his fear of what it would be like to have the door slam shut on the other side.
Yeah, it's his fear, but it's my fantasy. My deepest fantasy. I must admit it. I must. It's kind of hot. I don't know. Yeah.
It's okay. I can live with that fantasy. I can live with
it. All right, Carrie, that's our show for today. Thank you so very much. Thanks to Walter for producing the show. Thanks for Perry and Paul for doing everything they do behind the scenes to support the show. And thank you, the viewer, listener, reader, for being part of the Daily Coast community and being part of this fight for our democracy. This is it, guys. 2024. 2024. We've had a nice winning streak. It's felt good, right? 2022, yep. 2023. Yep. It felt really good. So let's keep that streak going. We can do it. Let's be the happy warriors. Take this thing to the end. And let's drive this stake in the heart of MAGA. So that's our goal for this year. Glad you're with us and glad you're along for the ride. And I'm so happy, proud, and grateful that you are with us as well. So love you all. Have a great week. See you all next week.